The views and opinions expressed by the guests, callers, and hosts on this and all Rense Radio Network programs do not necessarily reflect or agree with those of the network, its commercial sponsors, its radio station affiliates, or internet broadcast platforms. In these controversial times, we believe the First Amendment and freedom of the press are absolutely essential to the survival of our nation. Thank you. And now, enjoy the program.
It's Thursday. I think it's Thursday. Yeah, it is Thursday. Yeah, I got one right. Goes by so doggone fast. Merry Christmas to all of you. No, it's not too early. It is the Christmas season, and I hope all of you in your own way, in your own lives, have at least a little time to relax and enjoy and reflect upon things past and perhaps things present and certainly things future that might represent the goodness that our species certainly has potentially to offer to this beleaguered planet of ours. Our first guest tonight is a man who is truly legendary, and I mean this in the best sense. Now, for those of you who have listened to the program for any length of time, you know, and if you've visited the site, I am not hesitant at all to point out inappropriate behavior and outright murder carried out by some police officers, male and female, in this country. And I also point out that in every department there are wonderful people who are working to the best of their ability to make this a better place, a safer place, a happier place for all of us. And those people know damn well that there are some people in that department who should not be on duty. They shouldn't have a gun. They shouldn't be police. They're nutty. That happens, and they know it. So they also know that the vast majority of men and women who serve this country and their towns and their cities and communities have my highest respect and appreciation. And with that, let me introduce again his second visit to the program, and he's not on nearly often enough, and you'll see how this is going to tie in. Detective Jim Rothstein, New York City Police Department Gold Shield detective, 15 years, retired in highest standing. Hello, Jim. Welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me on again.
Indeed. Let me tell our listeners a little bit more about you. Jim worked on a special intelligence squad investigating high-level narcotics, prostitution, human compromise operations, and pedophilia. Pedophilia, that's the big word these days. You notice how it kind of came out all of a sudden in the last year or so, and especially since Pizzagate popped out? It's as if evil itself has been dragged out from under its dark rocks and caves, and it is standing in various locations now in broad daylight. We can see it for what it is, all of us, and I hope all of us take note of it, all of you out there, and understand that if this species is to survive on this planet and prosper, and if this planet is to survive, that evil must be rooted out and destroyed. It is not something that can be rehabilitated. It is evil. We are in the last inning of the game of life. Good versus evil. There's no other way to look at it. And if we are going to win, we're going to have to do it, and do it in a hurry. Detective Rothstein was assigned to a special 15-man squad in New York, answering to Governor Hugh Carey and the New York State Crime Commission. New York City Police Department Police Intel is the most proficient intel agency in the U.S. Think about that. With representation in every major American city and most foreign cities in the world as well. Amazing, isn't it? New York City police are all over the planet. Detective Rothstein traveled to most American cities investigating sex trafficking and other related crimes, some on very sensitive intelligence-related work. He worked extensively on the Minnesota Connection and came to Minneapolis to work with Detective Gary McGaughey, another true hero. Detective Rothstein was involved in many important arrests like the Frank Sturgis arrest and high-ranking CIA officials involved in pedophilia. He is known for being the top expert on pedophilia in this country, human compromise operations, and sex trafficking. So, Jim, when this Pizzagate thing began to unravel, and as I say, was dragged out from under the rocks with WikiLeaks emails, which didn't come from Vladimir Putin, we'll talk about that too. How did you feel about this finally getting out there? And I'm not saying the mainstream media is covering it because they're trying to call it fake news, when in point of fact, it's all too real. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, number one, to me, it was nothing new. I had this 50 years ago already.
Right.
And 50 years ago, we had this whole type of operation. We actually started uncovering it back in the 1966 is when we first got into it. And eventually the whole pedophile operation, I infiltrated it. It's all part of the human trafficking, human compromise. So the Pizzagate thing, true or untrue, is nothing new. That's been going on, and I have been following it ever since. It goes to the highest levels of our country, the continent, Europe. I had cases all over. I'm still very active in it, so it didn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
In fact, it's just the tip of the iceberg to start with.
Sure. Now, I think the most important thing is here, and I've been doing this program 24 years this spring. I have always said there is a cult, and I'm talking about a pedophile satanic cult at the top level, unfortunately, of globalist control. That's where this leads up to, and that's why there's been such an incredible effort to try to bury Pizzagate already. Yes, it's the tip of the iceberg, the gnat on the elephant, but it is nonetheless something that most people who are active on the alternative side of the Internet are seeing, many of them for the first time. They had no idea. I mean, my God, how could Hillary Clinton be allegedly involved? The Podesta brothers, how could they? He's her campaign manager. How could President Barack Obama be involved? These are new concepts to many people, and yet to you they're certainly old and come as no surprise.
No, they don't, because, like I said, we had uncovered this to the highest levels. In fact, the very first case that I got brought into on the international level was the Profumo scandal. And that happened in the early 60s. And they first came to see me in the 66, 67. And
this is the British government. They came to see you. How interesting.
Well, it was MI5 or 6 and Scotland Yard to make sure, and as you know now, this has all been exposed in England, this whole pedophile operation and all that.
Oh, my God, yes.
But they came to see me to make sure, because I had, by that time already, a high-level informant into that particular underground. And what they were here for was to see if any of that information had leaked out into the United States or basically New York City. And because of the contacts I already had in the underground, they came to see me to find out what was going on and what to do. Basically, it was to cover it up.
Ah, very interesting. Yeah, John Profumo and Underage Girls. I remember that.
It was Mandy Rice Davies was the big one.
That's right.
And like I said, I had an informant right in there. It was almost hilarious because they wined and dined me for a whole week while we worked to get the information. And then it disappeared for years, and all of a sudden it started coming up, and now there's all these scandals in England similar to what we're hearing about Pizzagate. So it was covered up for quite a while.
Yeah. We have, and I watch this pretty closely, not as closely as you do, but England, it would seem, I mean, when you think back of British history, relatively recently, the last 2-3 centuries, all these boys' schools they have, boys' schools. There's a reason for that. They're farms for pedophiles and perverts to go and they teach these kids things that they really shouldn't, and these kids are picked off by chicken hawks. You know the game better than anybody. And so when we hear about the highest levels in British politics, the BBC, Jimmy Savile, all of these people, Tim Refat can name them all, I can't. Now they find out that over 100 different professional soccer clubs in England are involved with pedophilia, the coaches, even the players. It seems to be that the British culture is as much of a pedophile culture as any culture on the planet. It's everywhere.
Well, and Jeff, if you look at what we have in this country, if it ever starts coming out, the stuff in England doesn't even compare to what we have here. One of the biggest farces that you're hearing put on the public now is that they're actively fighting human trafficking and this type of behavior. It's a total farce.
A lie.
Because when we were doing the investigations, we'd get to a certain level and we'd get stopped again. Then the next boss would come by or group that was honest and wanted something done, and we'd go again. And finally, even the governor of the state of New York, when he informed the State Select Committee on Crime, which I was part of with my partner, Matty Rosenthal, we ended up getting shut down.
So you knew it goes to the top. That's it?
Oh, yes. And how they use it. First of all, you do not hear about human intelligence, human compromise, even talked about. A lot of these kids are used purposely to compromise politicians, huge military people, business execs, just to compromise them. And we had all that going way back.
You know, they can take anyone, and this is one of many ways of doing it. This is not to say that, let's say a senator, a U.S. senator, a freshman senator. They can wine and dine the guy, take him out. He doesn't necessarily have to be a pedophile or even have those tendencies. They can give him a knockout drug, put a kid in bed with him, take a few pictures or some video, and the next day he wakes up, doesn't remember anything, and they show him the video, and they own the guy from then on. That's how simple it is.
Yes, but it is that simple, but they don't have to go to that extent. Many of these people, when they get that power, they feel they can do anything they want. And we had many of them compromised. I remember one senator, he had aspirations of running for president, and we got the word that he was at Uncle Charlie's in New York. And we went in there, and he was there with a couple of young boys. And that was the end of his presidency because we caught him. And
what's Uncle Charlie's, Jim?
Uncle Charlie's was one of the most notorious high echelon pedophile operations in New York. So we knew the place well.
You know, there's another thing I want to touch on briefly. Every year in this country, there's an enormous number of children who disappear. Now, many of them are certainly recovered. They're a divorce, one spouse will take off with the kids, or the kids run away and they're found, if they're lucky. A lot of them who run away are never found. How many of these children end up in these pedophile networks? And then I have a follow-up question. Are there every year, like, it seems like there's an unlimited supply of them for these creeps.
Oh, yes. And in New York, we used to see them. They had what they call the juice joints. You could go there on any given night. There'd be thousands of kids there. And runaways, which is very popular. Police like to call them runaways because then they're not crime statistics. But these kids would be brought out, forced into it from every type of thing, schools, you name it, the churches, and they would be available and on the market, and you would see these pedophiles come in and pick these kids up every night. And a lot of them were put in rings. We had people going around the country. In fact, one guy was using a Winnebago, and he traveled the United States buying and selling, trading kids. So it was quite sophisticated, and yet it was just something that went on because nobody talked about it.
When I suggest to our audience that the cult, I'll call it the cult, is essentially operating and has prominent people within it in virtually every city, every town, every community in the country. Is that an overstatement?
No, it's not. In fact, it is far more truth to it than anybody in this country wants to believe. And when we would talk about it, after a while, we could not even discuss this in the normal law enforcement community. We had to stay underground because of some of the ramifications, and people would take this information and use it. You know, and extortion was a big thing, not only for power, but for money. There are some just unbelievable cases.
How many children are murdered by pedophiles and satanic ritual abuse types in this country every year? Is it more common, again, like most everything else we've discussed, than you would imagine? Are these kids just, they run away, they're vanished, they're a statistic? So people just abuse them, kill them, throw them in a shallow grave, and that's it? Is this a common thing, Jim?
Yes, it is more common than anybody wants you to believe. We followed many of these things. We figured at one time that 200 now, when I use this number, these are not divorce things or anything. These are actual kids who disappeared into this underground to be lost forever. Many of them, if they did live, would join the underground. There's a whole underground of survivors. And I got to know many of them. I've talked to them. So, yes, there's a lot of kids that disappear. And there's no record of them because, like I said, the statistics show that there's not that much because they're all called runaway and homeless.
Got it.
So they don't keep crime statistics on it.
Got it. I think you probably have seen the so-called artwork in Tony Podesta's home, the pictures on the walls that he has, the paintings. Have you seen those online?
Yes, I have.
There is just, I have a great feeling of sadness when I look at those, and I try not to look at them because they make me sick. There is no question that man is essentially boasting and advertising about his lifestyle, his apparent lifestyle. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, sure, but that's quite common. And, the different drawings and what they're trying to do now, paint the picture that this is universal. Every different group has their own set of meanings and symbols. And starting way back when, We had located many of them, found out what they meant, but they're constantly changing. That's why somebody in law enforcement that works this must keep up with that. Otherwise, you will never understand it.
And then you have, I would imagine, a lot of law enforcement people, whatever that means, who are aware of this, who are tangentially involved with these rings, who are working on the inside to make sure there are no meaningful investigations, and probably would shut down their fellow officers from investigating things, whatever it would take. So the protection is there. The protection is also in judges. It's in city councilmen, county councilmen, political officials. They get people who are in these cults into key positions, and that's how the lid is kept on it. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And there's one other thing that nobody else wants to believe. But every law enforcement, and I can name you names and everything, but I will not do that on the air. In the very first case that we did, we convicted 11 of the top 12 pimps in this country. Every officer that worked that case, FBI, IRS, Customs, New York Police Department, and others, were shut out. Once you got done, you were gone. You got to get some laws in there that protect the policemen who try to do their job. No cop ever who went after the big time in this didn't lose his career or whatever.
Wow.
See, that's where the problem comes in.
And word travels fast. You want to be a successful career cop, you don't do certain things. Obvious.
Yes.
They didn't even have to be told.
Well, I've had them come to me and ask me, how far can I go before my career is in jeopardy? Why would any cop, federal, state, local, have to ask you how far they can go before their career is in jeopardy?
Well, that kind of sums it all up. That's
yes, it
horrible.
does.
When you see these things, Jim, it has to, first of all, you're a professional. But in the beginning, it had to just be heartbreaking. It probably still is, because you want to save some of these kids. But I would think that many of them are so horrifically damaged, even by the time you get to them, that they're almost not salvageable. Once you've crossed that line and put through those horrors, how could you ever pull yourself back together again? That's not easy.
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. There was a man, and people can look it up on the internet, Ed Skull Murphy, probably one of the most notorious pedophiles that ever walked the face of the earth. And if you look it up on the internet, there was a guy by the name of William McGowan who wrote a fantastic story about him called The Chickens and the Bulls. And it tells you how high up he was compromising people in that. And then when the State Select Committee of Crime started, how they got me and recruited me to become part of that was when Skull Murphy was called in to testify. And he said that when he met an honest cop that had integrity, and he was an older man by then already, he says, I found I had a way to get out of this. So all his life, and he became a great advocate and helped solve many cases and all of that. And he ended up dying of AIDS, but yet it took that for him to come out from it, and he openly took it on. So,
Remarkable.
yes, I've seen the worst cases you can imagine, people on their deathbeds. One girl in particular was catatonic, and I got brought in, and she came out of it. So there's never that you can't give them hope, but the whole thing has to be that they can find somebody they can trust, because their whole life they have been used and abused.
Oh.
And this is the thing that the general public and those people who are trying to do the right thing don't understand.
Got it. Stand by, Jim. We have to take a short pause. We'll come right back with Detective Jim Rothstein Just an incredible man who has served all of us so well. Stand by. Detective Jim Rothstein, this is a remarkable man. There's obviously several motion pictures in his career and his experience. You know, I have some pictures up of some of the principals in Pizzagate. I know it's kind of silly to spend so much time on Pizzagate when it's really so common in this whole field that you know so much about, but I look at some of these pictures, individuals who have high-ranking government consulting and operative positions and so on, and you look in their faces and you look in their eyes, and something's not right. They look evil. They look like they are demented, some of them. Now, that's a look that you've probably seen far too much of in your life. Many of these people have a bizarre look, and I would guess that probably the majority of them look rather normal. What kind of hallmarks? First of all, am I right about some of these people looking really satanic?
Yes, that is so true. And later, once you learn this and know what to look for, it is almost amazing. You can pick this stuff out just by being there. You can spot them. You can spot them by their actions and different things like that. It's quite quite normal to pick this out.
Huh.
But again, what we're talking about, such as the Pizzagate thing, remember just before the election there was word that a New York detective and a chief inspector had come up with stuff on Bill and Hillary?
Yes.
Remember that little story that ran?
Came and went.
Well, I was in that same position at one time, and I never forget the chief got called to the mayor's office, and I followed him because I knew we had just gone into stuff that even made Pizzagate look like an angel. And he got called to City Hall. He came out, sat on the bench for about 10 minutes, and came back to headquarters, went in his office, had our guy that took care of all the clerical stuff start shredding his papers, and then he retired. He was done. And I was the detective, and that same day, my assignment was stopped dead in its tracks. And what it was, we had identified a man who was supplying little boys to the United Nations, and I ended up arresting him. But everything was shut down, and the chief retired. I didn't see him again till he came to testify in front of the State Select Committee on Crime. So let's see what happens with these two cops. If the same thing happens to them, that all of a sudden you won't even hear about them anymore.
Wow. Where does the so-called satanic aspect enter this whole milieu of pedophilia? Pedophiles don't have to be satanic. They're just sick.
No.
They're creatures. They're monsters. And then we have this satanic angle to it. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Why, certainly. And that's why for somebody to understand how this all works, you have to know all the different aspects. And there's certain aspects that you will never, by the so-called experts, hear about. And just to bring in the satanic stuff, I first found out about it in the middle 60s. But by 1969, I had an informant take me to Untermeyer Park and show me a place where they were sacrificing German shepherds and kids. And I looked the place over, and he explained it to me. And it ended up being called the Son of Sam case, if you remember that
sure.
one.
Yeah.
With Berkowitz and that.
Yeah, David Berkowitz, yeah.
Berkowitz was a very small part of it. But what we did, and over the years have followed that all over the United States. At one point, just before Berkowitz was arrested, they started moving west along what we used to call the Interstate 9094 route. And it was an organized movement. In fact, I had thought it had actually moved earlier, but that's how we followed it. And eventually, we also found a part of it another New York detective years later called the Smiley Face Killers, where they were killing young college kids in water. And that has been written about, but nobody has ever talked about it. There was another detective by the name of Gannon and a professor at St. Cloud State University that actually identified the Smiley Face Killers. But as to the satanic part of it, we know they ended up settling in Kanab, Utah. I had people out of there spend time here letting me know what it was. And we also had two of the people who were involved in the killings that the Son of Sam got blamed for were right here in central Minnesota. The same drawings that I saw at that building in Untermeyer Park were here in a chapel on Saginaw Lake at St. John's in Collegeville, Minnesota. And we know they were here. I have positive IDs on them. So we also had another satanic group that traveled through what we called the Bible Belt. That was part of an offshoot of this. It had originally started in Louisiana, which was the same part of the Son of Sam operation that we ended up with in New York. And that spread out to Manson and all of that. And I think to this day yet, I'm probably the only law enforcement person that ever interviewed a high priestess, a legitimate. And it was just mind-boggling what we learned. And after that, there was a young boy killed in Matamoros, Mexico, college kid from the United States. And up to that point, our governments had said there's no, this whole satanic stuff is just made up. Well, there was a cigar butt on the scene. And there was a reporter there that heard me speak about how they use the cigar to clean the body, to cleanse the body before and after they sacrifice it. And after that, the high priest, the guy that was killing the guy, actually committed suicide. I had cases. I was up in Maine. Two priests came to me. They were going to sacrifice a 6-month-old baby, and we stopped it.
Two priests. Are these Catholic priests?
Yes, they came to me because a mother had come to them telling them what was going to happen, and I had moved up there and there being a big newspaper story about who I was. So they came to me, and, well, I knew it was true, but we stopped the thing from happening. So, yes, I have cases like this. I can go on. It would take 2 shows to give you all the cases that we have and the victims involved and such.
Jim, when you said the only person to ever really interview a high priestess in the cult, and you said you learned a lot, you were amazed. What did you learn? What was it about that? Did this woman seem to be, I don't want to use the word supernatural, but let me use the word very unusual? Was this an unusual person or just someone who was sick?
No, she was not sick. She herself was a victim, but one of the biggest victims you can ever imagine. She fell into the part that I got her on originally was the drug trafficking coming out of South America into New York. And I'm talking the highest levels of drug trafficking. But she was also a high priestess, and how we found out about it, we had the murder of a guy named Shelley Bloom, and at the death scene, there was a cigar butt. And, nobody could figure out what it was, and Shelley Bloom ran a nightclub for high-level pedophilia and that type of thing. But he got killed. Well, later on when we were interviewing her, I had gotten her out of the federal penitentiary, and we had her for 2.5 days. And when she saw the picture, I gave her this picture of the homicide scene, and she spots the cigar butt and tells us. And then she got into explaining how all this satanic, ritualistic stuff worked. She was a very smart, well-composed lady, but she was a victim herself.
So she carried on.
Yes, and one day when I called my contact, Contact told me that a couple days before, some people in suits came, and I've never seen her or heard of her again.
Well, obviously they knew she talked, or she admitted she talked under duress, and that was the end of her.
Yeah, but this, what an interview. And the funny thing is, we tape recorded everything and put it in the district attorney's safe on the last night, and the next day it was gone.
Oh, really? Well, you see, it penetrates everything. They have basically total command and control over the law enforcement system. I'm amazed you were allowed to do what you did for so long.
Well, we see, for about 13 years, I actually have been cut loose. And then when I got assigned by the governor of the state of New York to the New York State Select Committee on Crime, that was over the police commissioner mayor's head. And I could not be held accountable to the police department unless it was through the full committee in a hearing, and everything had to be sworn to. So we were immune from anybody, till they got stopped. Once I got stopped, I was sent back to the police department and retired.
All right, let me move further into this. A child is sacrificed. A teenager is killed. How much and how often would your guess be that the remains are eaten in various ritualistic methods? Cannibalism.
That I have no number on that. I've heard of it, but I never saw it.
Okay.
Like I say, usually I only talk about the cases that I can physically verify.
You've been there and done it.
I will tell you, I did hear of eating the flesh, but I was never physically able to verify it.
Okay. Now, I want to go back again. If you go to the Pizzagate section on my homepage and look, you'll see some pictures of people there. It says meet such and such, and look at. I'm not going to name any names. You go look at those pictures, and you tell me that these people are normal. Now, I've warned parents and advised them, and I am not a law enforcement genius like you are, and I've warned parents, for God's sakes, never let your children out of your sight. If you have any means to do that, don't. I would imagine that preschools, even schools, are sometimes involved with these things. Kids are set up, they're named, they're identified, and they're taken. I think I'm getting the feeling that this cult has a farm system that is endless. They have many ways of grabbing children, tens of thousands of them. Hundreds of thousands of them over the years, maybe millions ultimately. We don't know.
Well, that's true, Jeff. And like I said, we had the one guy with a Winnebago.
Yeah.
We had the case that we got with the guy that was supplying the boys to the United Nations. They had a system set up, and many times, in fact, the day we caught him, he had 3 boys from Baltimore, Maryland. But we actually, like with Skull Murphy and somebody, I can use his name because he's dead,
right.
But we physically would watch and be taught, how can you pick the kid and that. And they had this, I liken it to, how does a wolf know which deer out of a herd to pick? Well, I watched this. We watched it. We studied it. And yes, then there's the ones where these kids are there are some runaways, but why did they run? I had one girl from Connecticut, from the very first case I had, that was turned out and pimped. On the night she graduated from high school, and she had her first trick in her high school graduation dress. So, and she was 18 years old, and lucky we saved her.
How do they intimidate these? How do they intimidate these kids to do this? Do they threaten to kill their family members? Do they threaten to kill them? What's the big thing that turns them?
Many times they are. I just had a case here 2 years ago, and the local mayor, one of the local mayors, said she was a runaway, and she said, "What do you mean? They told me if I didn't do this," she was 15 years old, they were going to hurt my little brother and my mother. That's a very common thing. They'll find some subject. I have another one. A woman comes to me and her girlfriend. They keep her 2 kids hostage, and they make the kids were 2 and 3 years old, and they make the mother go out, turning tricks and recruiting 13, 14, and 15-year-old girls. There's 100 different ways, and then you got to watch what we call candy stores. It's not a candy store. Schools, the Boy Scouts, you name any one of those activities, sports. They're actively looking for kids.
So, okay.
I had a case.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
Yes, I had one case, another classic one. A guy was about 32 years old, and it was the Bojas restaurant in New York, and he killed himself, committed suicide. He caught his lover cheating on him, so he killed himself on the steps. Well, when we found out that this guy had been kidnapped out of Texas at the age of 13, nobody had ever seen or heard him at his home again. And there were thousands of people like that we had.
You mentioned sports, and I obviously have to mention Penn State, Joe Paterno, and staff. Is this to suggest that some of the players are also involved in this, that they are bisexual at least? Is there a lot of that going on in these locker rooms?
Well, I wouldn't say they're bisexual. They're not bisexual to start, but yes, I can tell you it is far more prominent than has ever been let out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And once someone is raped, I guess it becomes easier for some of them to continue along that path.
Well, there's a whole procedure that takes place. And it's, I don't want to go into it on the air, but there is a procedure that's usually followed to get them. Once they got them that far, then the rest comes easy.
They break them down.
But,
I got it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and, it's who does what to who first and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, yes, there is. But what's really amazing, Jeff? Why don't we have anybody that tells the truth about this?
Why? Man, you're it. I don't know anybody else, Jim.
And I went to Congress. I was asked to come to Washington, D.C., I believe it was 93. I did a confidential report, and I went to Congress with it. And the congressmen that were going to do something were shut out. So I took this to the highest levels.
Mm-hmm. Well, the power ultimately is life or death. People are threatened. You either do this, do you love your kids? Do you love your family? Or we're going to take care of them. It doesn't take much to turn somebody, does it, Jim, really?
No. And the interesting, though, was when we got stopped the last time with the State Select Committee on Crime, we had also brought in the Policy Science Corporation, which was with a guy by the name of Harold Laswell, Freudian scientist. And when I got stopped, I asked him, what could I do so that we could ever finish this? And he gave me a very good answer. I'd never thought of it. He says, you got to get the mothers to stand up and protect their children and make the husbands do what it takes to protect them. And a couple of years ago, I had a thing here where we started Mothers Against Trafficking. There is no law enforcement politician that could withstand a bunch of irate mothers, thousands of them, demanding something be done. And too bad I didn't know that when I was a cop. I recruited some, and I'd have probably been able to go further. So that's and right here in this little town, I'm the mayor. I passed a resolution, and if that resolution was ever enacted into law, I will guarantee you that this would cut down at least 80%.
So you could clean your town up pretty damn well if you can get that passed.
Oh, I cleaned my town up. That was very simple.
Do any of these... all right, now I'm going into areas I don't expect you to answer, even if you knew, and I know you knew, you know. Do sometimes we have cops who know some of these monsters, who take them out, who just get rid of them? Well, why turn them over to a system that's going to be played by lawyers and attorneys and money and corrupt judges? Are some of these people just removed by cops who've had enough?
Well, again, I like to always speak a fact. I can remember many times when I was a cop where cops would come to me and say, Jim, why don't you just shoot these guys? You know they're not going to do nothing to them.
Right.
I could never do that. And the team I had, we didn't do that.
Right.
I can imagine that there were cops that did that.
You know, I hate to say it, but I hope so. I hope so. Many times I wonder why we didn't. But there was a time where a pimp killed a cop in New York, a detective at Camp Easy, and I was assigned to what we called the pimp squad after that. You don't kill cops in New York, especially a group like that. Well, it was not pretty, but it didn't take us long to straighten things out. Well, I like to hear that. You know, when you got garbage, sometimes you just got to get rid of it sometimes. These people don't belong on this planet. This kind of inhumanity is just not, it's not human. It's not human.
Well, Jeff, the biggest problem right now that in our politically correct feel-good society, there's no place for truth or honesty. You can't talk about this or that because it's going to offend this one. It's going to offend this. That's why they're getting away with this.
You just summed it up, Jim. That's the whole
what
story.
It is.
Politically correct. My God, they're teaching kids in school now that pedophilia is just another lifestyle. And you don't have to decide if you're a boy or a girl until you grow up. The war on gender. You must be looking at this just appalled. I am. Well,
I'll tell you a situation I had. Right after the Stonewall, which was the rallying cry, and by the way, myself and Skull Murphy were responsible for the Stonewall. Nobody knew. There was only 3 people that knew the truth about what happened at Stonewall. But as a result of that, like I said, I was able to infiltrate almost anything, and I got brought to these meetings. And one of the plans was a 50-year plan was to legalize sex with children. And they figured it would take 50 years to get our society to fall into this. And look what's happening.
But they've broken it down, and they're clearly moving in that direction. So is Europe, and you are so right. Jim, we are out of time, but I can't even begin to thank you enough. Would you please come back again? We've got to pursue this. The more we educate, and you're the maestro, the more we have a chance of at least making a little dent in this.
Yes, I will gladly do that. You just let me know when.
Okay. Thank you, my friend. Great to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Merry Christmas, Jim.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. Detective Jim Rothstein, an honest-to-God American hero. And dear parents, it's dangerous out there. Please take seriously what you just heard. We will be back.